Thank you everyone for joining. This is part of our Q&A series with the community, and our hope is to provide updates on the program, allow you guys to ask questions, and if there's anything that you want to raise, questions, concerns, or things you just want to talk to other community members about, feel free to jump in and guide that conversation if you have anything in mind. And with that, why don't we go ahead and start with a brief update, unless anyone wants to start off with questions or comments. We'll come back to questions and comments at the end as well. Okay. All right. So Heather, do you want to provide an update on fundraising and where we are?
Of course. The last few months have been busy and productive. We had set a goal earlier this year. I believe we talked about it a little bit during the last Q&A of $400,000 for the next round of manufacturing. And to date, we're at about $177,000. We still have funds coming in, and we have talked to a couple of other folks in the community who have secured some matching gifts that that are still coming in and things like that. So we're continuing to raise money, but it is huge progress. We've raised more for the RPGRIP1 program this year than we have in years past. So that's all just kind of, I think, a sign of the building momentum for the gene therapy program and what we're able to do. And we also have been working on and have submitted a request for a TRAP grant, it's called. So it's a very large grant, and it's administered, by the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And it could be significant impact on the manufacturing and the gene therapy program. So as we discover potential grants, we are writing those and submitting them for the program as well. So I feel like a lot is going on, and we should know in the next few months, and we'll see a lot of sort of fruits from those labors.
Thanks, Heather. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to turn it over to Catherine to talk a little bit more about the program side of what's been happening since the last Q&A.
Yeah, so I'll talk just briefly. So one of the things that we've been working really hard on over the last year almost at this point is engagement with the regulatory body. So in this case, the FDA, we're working really hard to prepare all those documents, and our goal is to have that meeting by the end of this year, or submit by the end of this year, early next year. And that will be really significant for the program. It also opens up some additional funding opportunities. So we're really excited about that. We're excited about how far we've gotten with that. So that's a big thing. And then Jenny, do you want to talk about what else has been going on?
Sure. So I'll touch on the manufacturing a little bit, because that's where we have had a lot of our focus this year. So we're still working with Andelin Biosciences, and we are getting closer to developing a process with them before we scale up for larger manufacturing productions. So we've been working really hard over the summer and these past fall months to get that process locked down before moving forward. So that's where we are currently at with the manufacturing. So we are taking, I think, significant strides, and we are getting there.
All right, thank you all. So as you can see, even though we haven't reached that 400,000 goal yet, we're still putting, what's the current number, Heather, again?
About 177,000.
We're putting that to work. We're keeping things moving forward. That's primarily right now, the focus is on the manufacturing piece and ensuring that this relates to the actual manufacturing of the gene vector, the gene therapy itself. We refer to that as the RPGRIP1 gene therapy. You may also see from time to time us refer to that as it's a combination of letters and numbers, or OT004. And that's an internal reference that we've used in regulatory filings. It's how we refer to the final vector that would be used in clinical trials. So we're keeping everything moving forward. We still need to keep fundraising and ensure that everything continues at a rapid pace. So if there's anyone out there that you'd like for us to talk to that might be interested in engaging or feeling philanthropic or thinks that their company might be willing to give a gift, please reach out to myself or Heather. We're always available to have those conversations. And I think, Heather, we should come back to some of the creative fundraising ideas that others have had in the past few months, which I think they've had success with. But I do want to pause there and just see if there's any questions online or on the phone.
Can I ask a follow-up question about the grant that you spoke of relative to the Foundation Fighting Blindness? Is that does that look like a realistic possibility, a partnership with them, or a dual effort in that regard?
So they give out grants, and it's much more transactional than a partnership. So they'll give out that we applied for about $1.5 million. That's the most you can apply for. And the funding depends every year on how much money they have. I think their primary source is donations as a nonprofit as well. And so I think from what we've heard is that they hope to be able to fund more groups this year. We did apply 2 years ago and we scored well, but we were not funded. It was a really competitive year. And so we're applying again this year, and the hope is that we do get it. We're not sure what the chances are, but we at least passed the letter of intent phase. So the first phase is you submit a very, very short summary, and then they decide if you can come in and put in a full application, which we got to that stage. We've put in the full application, and we should know sometime in about March or April what the outcome of that decision is, but unsure what the likelihood is. We're very hopeful. And after the meeting with the FDA that Catherine mentioned, that we're hoping to have in the first part of next year, hopefully January, February, Jenny can speak better to those timelines. That should allow us also to apply for another set of funding, which would be a large amount of money as well. So we'll keep applying for things as we identify those potential opportunities.
And just to make sure, so the TRAP grant, it's an acronym, and what does it stand for? Is it translational?
I think it's translational research. You're putting me on the spot, Heather.
I'm
Jenny,
sorry.
no, that's okay. I always refer to it as TRAP, so I actually don't know offhand what it stands for. Translational Research Award Program. We can look it up and come back to that in a second.
So it's one of the, my point in saying that is it's one of the programs they have to give away some of their funding. So it wouldn't be in-house, it would be very much external.
Yeah.
Yep. And it is the Translational Research Acceleration Program. So it helps accelerate research programs in the space that we're working in.
With the meeting with the FDA, is it the hope that might lead to some government funding? Is that what source would provide funding following those meetings, or what else might be involved?
Yeah, so the meeting, let me back up and I'll tell you a little bit about the meeting. The meeting that we are working towards is called a pre-IND meeting. So when at the point that you go to start your clinical trial, you first have to submit an IND. So the step before that is the pre-IND. And this is to discuss the design of our manufacturing process, our clinical study design, which we've been working with our clinical advisors and our patient advisory board on, and then to review the data we have to date from animal studies. And am I forgetting anything else? Manufacturing, our final toxicology study. This is the final pieces we have before clinical trial, our manufacturing, which we're in the middle of, and then our toxicology study. So we usually present at this stage to the FDA all the data to date, and then our plans for the other pieces that we're working on, so that they can comment and say, yes, we agree that's a good path, or no, we think you should consider changing your experimental design or look at something else. So it allows you to get feedback before you get to that clinical trial point. So once we have that meeting with the FDA and get that feedback, the funding that we can apply for is actually called CIRM funding. It's out of California. And so it's the state of California, and I think it's all funded by taxpayers. And so you can go and apply in California for support for your development costs for your program and clinical costs, depending on the stage and the type of application. So it's the FDA would be federal engagement, but actually the pot of money sits separate from that in California. And the only reason they're tied is CIRM makes the feedback for that pre-IND meeting part of their criteria, because they'll review that and then take that on as part of their assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right, I think we have some in the chat. Hold on.
So we had one that asked about FFB funding, and that's sort of what we have been talking about. We have applied for FFB funding this year, and we'll hear in March if that application was successful. The other question is, what is the expected time for completion of manufacturing? Jenny.
So Jenny, do you want to speak just I think of broad strokes about the process, but also then once we get to the clinical manufacturing, how long that piece takes, because I think that might be of interest as well.
Yeah, so there's several steps to manufacturing the gene therapy. Right now, we are in that process development step, and it's on a smaller scale to make sure that this is the process we want to use moving forward before we scale up to a larger bioreactor and then eventually the clinical material. So it happens in stages. The clinical material itself is a long process because it's a rigorous process, and it has to meet certain quality standards to be approved by the regulatory body. So that whole process in itself is about 6 to 8 months just to manufacture the clinical material, which will be used in clinical trial. Does that answer the question? Okay.
If we don't have any questions right now, another thing I'd like to briefly touch upon that we mentioned in our newsletter is a partnership that we have started with a group called MetaBanks. So MetaBanks is a group that so they have a platform, and it helps bring patients and their medical history sort of together with the life sciences, and it's a way for patients to provide their medical history to a group of researchers, and in a way for there to be some sort of compensation back and forth with that. So we're really excited about that partnership. If anyone has questions or wants to know more, we're happy to talk about it on how to do that. I can also drop the link that we have for the landing page into the chat. I can do that now. So you can check it out on your own time, see if it's something that you might be interested in or want to learn more about.
Oh, Tony, I think you're muted. Were you asking something?
MetaBank would be interesting to know more about if you want to say more about that now, Catherine.
Sure, and we're also happy at some point later down if we want to include MetaBanks is also really interested in talking to the community and getting more of their story out. But so MetaBanks is a platform that bridges patients and researchers, and they get consent from patients or caregivers to curate medical data that can come from various sources. So let's say a patient went to multiple different doctors, they curate that on their end, they organize it longitudinally, which means like over time. And that in that way, they're able to provide really comprehensive medical records. And this can help in terms of when there's no natural history study that's been performed, or there's not good understanding of sort of the progression of disease over time. If that's not well known in the literature, this can really help in terms of understanding sort of how to prep for clinical trial, but also letting the FDA understand sort of why certain choices are made in terms of clinical trial design. Yeah, so it's patient-centric. It's where patients can take ownership of their own medical records and contribute to medical research themselves.
Are there other entities besides Foundation Fighting Blindness that have a special interest in this general area that would be potential grantors, entities to which Odelia could apply for grants?
Yeah, we've looked at other opportunities in the past. FFB is by far the biggest grantor. I think we've looked at a few smaller ones. We've applied for everything that we had access to. I'm actually thinking there's a few we have a second program in Usher, and there's a few Usher groups. Heather, do you know of any of the other ones we've applied for this program specifically?
We've talked to several foundations that fund translational science. There was one in Texas, and we've reached out, but we've not been a good fit for any of them so far. So whenever we do hear about one, we call them to try to, have that informational interview. And so the short answer is yes, we've applied to some or talked to them, but we haven't received any funding. And actually, I wanted to mention that on the last call, someone suggested some foundations in Saudi Arabia. And I have searched and sent emails and reached out to as many folks as I could find contact information for, and haven't been able to get a response from the couple places that were suggested in Saudi Arabia. So I was going to ask if anybody on the call has any more suggestions for people that I could reach out to. I would be happy to do that. And there was a suggestion that there is funding in this area, and I haven't been able to find the right person to communicate with. So if you know of somebody there, if you were on the call, or if you have a suggestion of somebody to contact, please let me know. I'll actually put my email right in the chat.
Hey, Heather, if you want to just change if the Odelia folks want to change your name, there's a rename function, just add your email address.
Oh, how smart are you?
Somebody asked about my retina tracker and how it differs from MetaBanks. I think, Catherine, you've looked at some of them. You have a sense of the data in my retina tracker, but I think it was more high level. It wasn't as detailed.
Right, it's high level, and it's more my retina tracker is more of a patient registry, where it allows for patient recontact. Let's say if there's a therapy out there, or if somebody wants to contact everyone with X disease or X mutation in whatever gene, whereas MetaBanks is more curated and longitudinal, and it's really more engaging in the research itself ongoing, as opposed to my retina tracker, which is more passive, I would say.
But also MetaBanks, at least at this point, it's not collecting, it's not like you have to go in for a new visit. It's pulling data, if you allow it to, from your medical record. And part of what we're piloting with MetaBanks is trying to get an understanding of if the data in the medical record is helpful, specifically for this program. And then I think that's a question we have, and they're a newer platform, so they're learning that as we go. It's trying to get an initial set of data from a few patients to see, is this information that we could get an understanding of vision decline over time, or is that largely absent in a detailed manner in the clinical record? And we'd have to collect that through a separate study or in parallel with a clinical study. So if folks are interested, please reach out. I'm thinking, Catherine, should that go to you or to the info box? Because we are talking to MetaBanks about having an informational session jointly with them.
Yeah, either one. I I follow both. So either the info box or myself, if you're interested, and we can start having direct conversations with Medibanks themselves if you're interested.
And then we've had a few questions about the treatment and foreign patients. So I can touch on those real briefly. So does the treatment help stop the deterioration of eyesight, or does it also treat people who have lost their sight completely? So with gene therapy, our initial goal or aim with the program is to stabilize function at the time of treatment. So whatever amount of visual function you have at the point the gene therapy is delivered, that would be preserved. That was the primary goal with the program. And that was, I think, our original thinking. That being said, in speaking with our clinical advisors over the past 2 years and what they've seen possible in other gene therapy programs, and I think related inherited retinal disorders, there is a possibility, we think, for a regain of function, but you'd have to have enough photoreceptors retained in order to regain that function. So we think there probably is a point that we can't regain function, but we think that there's a possibility, and it's going to be unknown until we get into clinical trials how much function can be regained. I'd say, again, the primary goal is to, at a minimum, stabilize the function that's there at delivery of the gene therapy. The hope is that we can regain some of the function that's lost as well. And then will foreign patients be allowed to apply for trial? European folks, sorry if this has already been answered, no worries. Don't worry about asking questions. I think a lot of people join at different times in these conversations, so always feel free to ask. We, at the moment, we're engaging the FDA, who is US based. That being said, we haven't made a final decision on where a clinical trial will be held. It's possible that could end up being in Europe. It could be in the US. It could be in other countries. And things that impact that decision are sometimes costs. There are a number of countries right now that we're aware of that are trying to throw out cost incentives to running clinical trials in that country. Australia is one I know of offhand. We haven't engaged Australian regulatory environment yet, though. But there can be advantages. There's also shorter timelines sometimes that are introduced depending on how familiar that regulatory body, that country or system is with gene therapy or an ocular program, or some of the profiles depending on the age of the patient. So there's strategic reasons we might end up engaging. In Europe, that would be EMA. In the UK, that would be the MHRA. And there might be reasons we would make a different decision. The other thing, and something we've talked about for a long time, is if there was a pharma or biotech industry partner at some point, they may have a preference, a strategy that guides the country that they would conduct a trial in. So we haven't made a decision yet. All that to be said, even if we did hold a trial in the US, folks in other countries can participate, and sometimes you can have trial sites in other countries. For gene therapy in a very small treatment population, we're right now looking at probably in a phase 1-2, and that would be a combined study. That first time we run a study in humans, we're likely, Catherine, where did we land? 15 patients, is that the number? So usually, in order to have the most consistent results, we usually would do that at one trial site. But again, this hasn't been ultimately decided. We haven't picked a site or a country even, and all of that remains open at this point. And then I think somebody did ask, when do we think it'd get the therapy in the market? Market meaning post-approval. So right now we're in preclinical testing. Our aim is to be in clinical trials in 2025. And I think largely still dependent on finances, but if we can keep things funded, we can keep things moving towards that goal. With that in mind, we'd be looking to run an aggressive clinical trial and trying to not just prove safety in the initial trial, but also therapeutic effect. which not all trial designs can do, but because this is a gene therapy, because we run that first trial in patients with the disease, we can usually look at how effective the treatment is as well. So that can take, looking at the number of patients, that could take 5 or 6 years once we're in clinical trials to collect data from all those 15 patients. And then it's really a strategic decision on whether we have to run one more trial with more patients or whether there's enough data to then go for approval at that point. So I think we're still far off from that point, but we would try to move things along as aggressively as we can, as fast as we can to patients at the end of the day. And it's probably a cap. So right now we're looking at a cap of 15 patients in that first trial. So that would be what we're proposing, and what we'll get feedback from the FDA on is proposing a 2-dose escalation. So the FDA usually likes to see a 3-dose. So you start at 1 dose and then you move to a slightly higher dose after the first one seems safe. And then after the second one seems safe, you move to the highest dose. We're proposing to start in the middle because we want to make sure that we're treating with the most effective treatment we can when people are in clinical trials. But again, this is open for discussion with the FDA. It's quite possible we'll get feedback or pushback in that area. Usually each dose treats 3 patients and then moves to the next dose. So we'd be looking to treat 3 patients in 1 dose, 3 patients in the next dose, and then declare a treatment dose that we'd be using called our maximally tolerated dose. And then 9 more patients would be treated. And that would round out that study. And then again, we might have enough data in rare diseases sometimes, not often, but sometimes you can have enough data from that one trial to ask for approval if it's really compelling. Quite often you have to run a second trial or an extension to pull in more patients and collect that data. So I think it'll just be really dependent upon the type of data and the type of study we're running at the end of the day. All great questions. Anything, Jenny, Catherine, Heather, I'm missing on those answers?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. There was one question on before the therapy is delivered to market, do you have advice on how to delay deterioration?
That's a really good question. I don't have a lot of good advice in that area. I do know that there are clinical trials ongoing that are looking at non-gene specific ways to preserve and stabilize function in retinal dystrophies, but I don't think those results, I'm not sure those trials have ended yet, so I don't know the results of them. I do know a lot of people feel sunglasses are important to try to preserve visual function. And so I've heard that in a few related vision loss disorders. Does anyone on the phone call know of anything that's recommended by your clinicians? No. Okay.
Can I ask a question about, I don't know anything about applying for grants. I'm a rank amateur in this whole area, but I wondered whether any of the medical specialists on your board could be helpful in either in encouraging the Foundation Fighting Blindness to give a grant to Odelia, or anything in that category.
Yeah, Heather, feel free to jump in here. I mean, I can provide at least at a high level. In the past, we've talked to our board members. We've reached out to Foundation Fighting Blindness directly as well. And I think they try to just retain a fair, open process. And sometimes also their criteria can shift year to year, depending on what their funding priorities are. So that's something that we don't always have a direct line of sight on. I think we've had a few board members try to, encourage FFB fund the program, but I think it's a tough decision at the end of the day for them. Heather, anything else to push on?
Not so much with FFB, but definitely with other organizations. We've asked the board to make introductions, and what we're finding is that we have lots of interest. A lot of companies really like what we're doing as a nonprofit model and are very supportive of what we are doing. And we actually have a couple that are trying to make it fit within their giving guidelines. So we don't necessarily fit with the stated guidelines for most foundations, but we have gotten feedback that because what we're doing is unique and much needed in the space and kind of exciting for a new way of getting therapies to the patient, to rare disease patients, we've gotten feedback that they're trying to work with us to find a way they can give us some money. It won't be probably huge amounts of money, but I feel like we'll start to see some more smaller amounts that all together will make an impact and help us move the needle. So that is kind of, instead of going after really something huge, except for FFB with the TREP grant, we're going after more like $5,000 and $10,000 gifts from some of these companies, because they can do that outside of their traditional grant making vehicles. So they can find some money to support what we're doing, because it's important. And if we can make this work for RPGRIP1 gene therapy, then we can kind of forge a new path for some rare disease therapies. Does that answer your question?
We do have one more question in the chat. Someone asked if they can get 2 gene therapies in their lifetime, or if it is a one and done treatment.
So usually gene therapy is thought of as one and done. That being said, there are a number of ongoing studies generally in the gene therapy space to figure out how to bypass that. So normally when you receive a gene therapy, your body starts to build up an ability to kind of fight back like you would a cold over time. So if you try to deliver a second one, usually that effect would neutralize the second delivery of the gene therapy. That being said, specifically, we're looking to do a subretinal delivery. And I know that there's some ongoing research to show that because of the relative, the eye is thought to be relatively immune privileged. And so it doesn't have the same immune response as the rest of the body. The thought is that you could go in a second time. So we're not currently planning that with this program. It's not something we're looking at this point. Usually that would become of interest for someone like Luxturna. So once Luxturna has gone into patients initially, if they start to see in the very, very long term a loss of the effect, I think there are probably some ongoing studies with that program to look at a second course of delivery. And so we do think in the subretinal space that if we were able to do this, this would probably be the most likely, because that immune response isn't as strong. And I think I will leave it as we're hopeful, but we do know the effects, at least what Luxturna has seen to date, are pretty long-lived at this point.
Well, and I just actually too, I think the question too is getting to the point of if there was a new gene therapy with a different vector.
Okay.
Could you get that?
Yeah, I mean, usually, again, it kind of gets at how immune privileged the eye is and whether it's going to react, because you have two things that you can react to. So in this case, we're delivering the transgene, which is the RPGRIP1 part of what we're delivering. And it's being delivered by the vehicle, which in this case is ANC80. So that's the capsid, that's the type of vector we're using to bring our RPGRIP1 into the photoreceptors. So you can develop antibodies to that capsid, or you can develop antibodies to your transgene. So if you were to deliver something with ANC80 again, that is the most likely thing to react. If you were to deliver something from a different capsid, different vector, but it was still, if you're delivering RPGRIP1, you may still have a response. But again, all that being said, in the eye, we do think that response is fairly blunted compared to the rest of the body. So we're hopeful that might be might be other opportunities in the future that we don't see with gene therapy delivered to the brain or systemically. So all very hypothetical at this point, unfortunately, but I do know there's a lot of groups working on this.
And the next question is, my daughter is 4 years old and her doctor advised that she should wear glasses because she's farsighted. Does that help with the gene therapy? And is it a side effect of being a carrier of RPGRIP1?
So I'm assuming that your daughter is the daughter you're speaking of, who's a carrier, is not, doesn't, you have a different family member that actually has RPGRIP1 vision loss. But no, it's, I mean, the wearing glasses will not affect or help necessarily as it comes to gene therapy eligibility or its effects. But if you're talking about a child that is a carrier of the RPGRIP1 mutation, so they only have one copy instead of two, I'm not sure if there is any known effect on vision for those who are carriers. Catherine, have you ever seen that in the literature?
I have not.
Okay. And do you think children will be in the clinical trial list? So right now we are targeting for our clinical trial design, and this is again in discussion with the FDA, it might change, or if we're in a different regulatory environment, the clinical trial could absolutely change. But right now we're aiming to run a clinical trial most likely in what we would deem an adolescent population. So 10 to 12, what's our starting age, Catherine? Is it 10 or 12?
And
10 to 18. Because we think we can run the shortest clinical trial in that patient population and show potential efficacy. Because from what we've heard from our clinical advisors is that the most consistent progressive event in vision seems to happen in adolescence. So there's a lot of loss early on. We think from a strategic standpoint, the FDA, it's going to be very hard to propose running a very, very early infantile trial. Just knowing how the FDA usually reacts to that might be impossible. And the progression from like an infantile stage through a younger pediatric stage, so pre-adolescence, I think the trajectory, the progression is much more variable in patients. So we'd have a hard time showing an effect that's consistent across patients. So currently, we're thinking it'll likely be in that adolescent range. And the hope is once we show that that's effective, then expanding into a younger patient population as well as adult population.
And just to reiterate too, I think Ashley said this before, but this is what we're proposing to do. It doesn't mean that that's what will end up happening. The FDA gets a lot of say. And so things can happen that change that. But at this point, that's what we're thinking.
Most likely.
And as Ashley said too, it helps. This is one of the reasons why we have started this partnership with MetaBanks, is to be able to get additional information on what that trajectory looks like in patients during that window, especially to understand sort of if that is the best time or not. So.
Heather, we can continue taking questions, but I do also want to leave a little bit of time because I think you wanted to highlight a few folks who have done some interesting fundraising events recently, or community fundraising that looked like they were effective, at least within their communities.
Right. I do have a couple things I wanted to bring up to this group. One is that thank you to all of you who are on this call who helped us get to where we are so far with the fundraising. We truly would not be where we are and have made so much progress over the last few months if it wasn't for y'all. So thank you very, very much for that. And a couple of things that we're doing, or I guess one thing that we've done is Odelia has entered into a partnership with a minor league hockey team. And one of the players on one of the teams is running a program called Goals for Vision. So every time that player scores a goal, he's making a donation of $10. And we're in the process of asking others on the team, as well as the league and possible sponsors, to join with that. So it's not just his $10, but then it can start, to be somebody else's 10, and eventually it'll be, I don't know, $10,000 a goal. And so I bring that up because if you have a minor league hockey team, or you have a minor league team in your community and think that might be something someone on the team would like to do, we're putting together some collateral. We did some social media slides and some other information that we could send them if they were interested in partnering with a nonprofit to raise goodwill in their community, but also help raise awareness, because every time wherever they play, we put out flyers about the program. And so it just helps more folks know about what we're doing. And that's a big part of what we need to do. So it's another idea of a way that we can raise funds and awareness. And I think, can I share my screen, do you think?
You should be able to.
Yeah, you should be able to.
I just wanted to show our store, which I've now lost. Here it is. So we launched a store for t-shirts and sweatshirts and things like that. And we have a few shirts in there, and many of these ideas came from people on the call, came from the community. And if you have an idea for another shirt or design, let us know and we will add it. We can certainly do that. You can order a single shirt, you can order a whole bunch. There's all different colors, several designs that we have in here. But the idea behind this is to, again, raise awareness about rare diseases, about RPGRIP1, about what we're trying to do to create a therapeutic. So we have had several folks order from the store, and there's going to be a link on our site, and actually I'll drop a link into the chat. But it is, for some people, it's the holiday giving season. And so if you are looking for some gifts, I encourage you to go visit that, but then also wear it. And if hopefully somebody will ask you, well, what is that? What is Odelia? What does it mean to see things differently? And so we've started that as well. And then part of the funds that were raised, a couple different people in our community did fundraisers where they live. So we had Melissa in Texas. She did a couple different things, but the one that was super successful was at a pizza place. They have it's called Mod Pizza, and they do a night, I believe, once a month. And she just went on their website. They had an application that she filled out. It was very easy. I sent her our IRS determination letter. And on that night, the restaurant gave proceeds, a portion of their sales that night, to Odelia. And so Melissa put it out on social media. She put it out on her neighborhood Facebook page, and they raised in one night, people eating pizza, over $500. So there was zero cost. So all of that money went to the RPGRIP1 gene therapy program, the fundraising for that. And it's things like that in local communities that are resonate within the community that will all add up together to help us make our goal. Gavin in the UK does things that are very UK-ish, if you will. But he does football, which is also, for some of us, it's soccer. And they have a rugby tournament. And so the teams paid an entry fee, and that was donated to Odelia. And he did several of these small events, but ended up raising $12,000. So it really does make a difference. And so if you have thoughts in your community of things that you can do, it can be, I mean, anything really, but it's your personal networks and something that is local for you, and you can get the word out on social media, and we can help you with whatever we can as well, creating slides or the paperwork and things like that. So I wanted to highlight those because they were creative and also easy to implement, and all went back to the fundraising program. Does anybody have any questions about those?
Erin had a comment that her bonfire shirts arrived.
Oh,
yesterday, and it looks like they were great.
good, good, good.
And by the way, the person who had asked about RPGRIP1 and whether that affects farsightedness. So it can cause severe farsightedness. It's part of the manifestation. So yes, that would be related to RPGRIP1.
Are there any additional questions folks want to ask or put in the chat?
Oh, I do. I knew there's one more thing.
Okay.
So we would also like to start highlighting some patient stories or families stories about the Melissa's pizza fundraiser or Gavin's rugby tournament. We want to get that out on Facebook and have a page on the website that highlights some of that. So it kind of gives other people ideas. So I'll be reaching out to people on the call to just help me write some quick stories, not long, that we can use to promote what we're doing to raise funds and awareness for the RPGRIP1 gene therapy program. So just be on the lookout for that. And if you have other suggestions, and we have that video that is on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. And if you want to share that with people to let them know more about Odelia and what we're trying to do, there's those things. And you know, Catherine, you should mention your videos.
Sure. So for the last couple months and sort of ongoing, we are putting together videos every month that go over some of the questions that are common that come up for patient advocates in terms of how do they go about helping in drug therapy development, things like that. So we've had 2 videos come out now. Our one in October was free resources that are available if you're interested in learning about, you know, how drug therapy happens, or you know, drug repurposing. How does that happen, and how can patient advocates get involved? There's a lot of resources that are available freely that helps kind of patient advocates get started in their journey of that. The most recent video that came out, I think yesterday, is on research tools. So this is something that researchers and scientists talk about a lot, are research tools. And we're not talking about screwdrivers or hammers or even like a pipette and a beaker. We're talking about things like models of disease and antibodies and things that we use in order to develop drugs. And that can be used for any kind of drug development. They're really sort of ubiquitous in terms of their use in all diseases and for all stages of therapy development. And so trying to get the education out there to patient advocates of what those are and how to help make those available for researchers if that's a concern, so sort of disease dependent. But this is sort of an ongoing education piece that we're going to be putting out every month to talk about different things that come up for patient advocates in their journey for drug development.
Can I ask the universe of patients with the condition? Did I hear on an earlier call that we think the universe is about 600 people that we know of, or do we have a feel for a universe?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So in the US, the number ranges for RPGRIP1 cases. So this would be patients not necessarily with an LCA6. Actually, sorry, let me back up. The US based numbers are primarily driven by LCA6 diagnoses. And that number ranges from about 300 to 800. Worldwide, there was a genetic study looking at regardless of diagnosis, because with RPGRIP1 you can have LCA6, cord13, some folks get a retinitis pigmentosa diagnosis. I think we've even seen a chromatopsia recently. So you can have a range of diagnoses, but if you look at those who have vision loss caused by RPGRIP1 and from a genetic unbiased study, so not necessarily driven by clinical reports, that number worldwide is thought to be 20,000 patients worldwide. So that being said, that's the biggest population likely that we could imagine. The amount of people that have actually been identified as having RPGRIP1 associated vision loss it's going to be much smaller, just due to access to genetic testing in different countries. So that's probably the biggest driver of that number being less than 20,000. And then also when you look at who might benefit from gene therapy, not every country is open to use of gene therapy or allows access, and so that becomes a commercial and marketplace discussion. But we think the biggest opportunity might be 20,000 at most.
Do we have a feel for the number of different entities that there are who would be essentially competing with Odelia for grants? For example, with Foundation Fighting Blindness, grants from them?
I don't know if we ever got the final number of applicants from the last round. Do you know, Jenny? No.
No, we didn't. I don't think we had access to that information.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think most of the folks that apply for Foundation Fighting Blindness grants in the same category as us are mostly academic universities that are running similar programs. Maybe, I do think the advantage here is we've organized, we're not just organized and focused on the preclinical, the animal efficacy testing. We've lined up and we started manufacturing, which I think is a big plus from where we were 2 years ago. We also have already engaged and mapped out which company we would do the toxicology study with. We also have a clinical trial plan, and we've engaged a clinical advisory group, the patient advisory board. I think we're very well organized compared to some of those other programs. So I think we're in a good position. I think it sometimes can come down to those priorities of, is the priority this year to fund a gene therapy or to fund an innovative technology that, might be gene editing. It's I'm just throwing that out as an example. So sometimes it can be the scoring, how well do we score on and ranking the science and the strategy, but it can also be just funding priorities can shift and change. And we don't know much about how FFB makes those decisions, but I'm hopeful. I think the team's pulled together a really, really strong application this year.
That's great. Thanks.
And I will mention just to make sure that you guys fully understand the impact of the funding is the fundraising to date helps us keep those pieces moving forward. So even if we're not fully hitting, our fundraising goal of 400K, we are still able to continue moving things forward. And to speak to in that grant application, the fact that we have started manufacturing, we've spoken to the results we've started to have in that manufacturing process in that grant application, the work we've done with the patient advisory board and clinical advisory group, that's really important. And I do think really helps set us up for success. And it allows us to put our best foot forward and show that we're organized, we're ready to hit the ground running. It's really just about funding at this point. So we've everything lined up and ready to go. So I feel good about it. And I want to say thank you and let you guys know that that's your funding really is impactful. All right, anything else? I know we're about to run out of time. Anything else we want to touch on before we leave?
I just sent you a direct message with a question in it, Ashley.
So I think the question is speaking to, gene therapy will only prevent people from losing more of whatever vision is left, so they won't be able to see like us. So the original aim, and I think the primary aim, is to at a minimum preserve what vision is left at the time of treatment, so you don't progress further. We we do think there is an opportunity, and we're hopeful that there might be regain of function in the photoreceptors that are left at the time of treatment. So if we want to make this a bit more simple, hopefully this helps folks understand. We think there's a few phases of progression. So if you have a photoreceptor with RPGRIP1 and RPGRIP1 is dysfunctional, your photoreceptor doesn't die immediately. It first loses its ability to function, and the photoreceptor is still intact. And after a long period of time, and this seems very long in RPGRIP1 patients, the photoreceptor, after that loss of function, it'll go functionally dormant, and then it will just continue to exist in that functional dormancy for a long time. Eventually, the photoreceptor will die, but that's very long. We think that often happens late. I mean, it depends on where you are in the eye. The central vision does seem to be retained longer, but even then, that process can be into adulthood. In some patients, there has been retention of central vision late into adulthood. And that process can really vary. We don't really have a good idea of where photoreceptors are ultimately lost, but we think that functional dormancy is the first phase. And if we can treat people who have photoreceptors, but where they don't function anymore, they're functionally dormant, we think that there is an ability to regain that function once we put the RPGRIP1 back in. But we won't know that until we get into clinical trials. Really, that has to be tested in humans. We really have no way of cleanly and clearly predicting that in the animal studies we have. So this is true about most gene therapy programs, is because it's a single treatment, you're initially trying to preserve function at the point of treatment. The hope is that you might regain function, but that's not always possible. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see on that. But our clinical advisory group has actually convinced us to at least be more hopeful of that than we originally were. All right, and feel free to reach out. Our emails are all in our name tag. I don't know what you call these, but on the screen, feel free to reach out. And then if you want to send something more broadly to the info box, it's info@odelia.org. We'll reach out about a MetaBanks co-Zoom, hopefully in the coming weeks as well, if you want more information. All right. Thank you all for joining, and let us know if you have any questions. We will reconnect probably with another community FAQ or Q&A, apologies, in the new year. I think that's when we're next slated to do it. We're on about every 3 to 4 month cadence, depending on how often folks want to talk. So let us know if you have questions in the meantime. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.